Hello, well this is part two to a three-part technique widely used by successful writers but something of a secret. And in part one I looked at the first part, which is the grab, which in summary is the technique of planting a question in the mind of the reader. And now we're into part two, which is the tell. Now, in broad terms, the tell, which follows the grab, is an attempt to answer or partly answer the question that was posed within the grab. But there's a lot more to it than that. In fact, I would say one of the challenges faced by lots of authors is they set up a nice grab and then the tell is a fairly miserable monotone. So what can you do to make the tell part of the chapter or the piece that you're writing work well? Well, there's a whole series of techniques here, and I'm thinking strategically. Obviously there's thousands of writing techniques, and I'm not getting into those, so we're looking at this strategically in terms of structuring. Now there are lots of things you can do, but the first thing clearly is to try to make sure that the tell is not one long chunk but chunked up into smaller workable pieces that, and when I say workable, they work for the reader. So let's dive in now to some of this three-part method and the tell, and to look at one or two of the techniques that you can certainly use to good effect. So the grab, tell, tease. Let's take a further look. Well, part two, the tell, as I just said, and the first thing I'm going to mention is what I'd call the hidden headline. Now, if you read newspapers and magazines, you'll often see there are headlines and subheadlines through what you're reading, and they break it up and give clues to the reader of what the content is and so on. And in fact, in a non-fiction book, there's a lot to be said for putting headlines in, but it isn't really the sort of thing you'd necessarily do in fiction, and certainly in non-fiction it isn't necessarily a style that the reader really wants to adopt. But you can have what I'm calling here the hidden headline. So if you think of your content, the tell part of the chapter, and how you want to cover things in it, you can come up with a series of headlines that could be used for the content but not actually to include them. This helps you structure it. The headline, in a sense, captures what this piece is about. Just doing the exercise of writing the headline, you'll find, helps you create structure in the content, and it also helps you discern whether or not maybe some things really belong in there. So come up with headlines. They can be hidden headlines, but they can certainly help you structure the tell. The next thing I'll mention is nesting and interleaving. Now, what I'm talking about here is the grab, tell, tease structure can be used again within the chapter, and the most common place to use it, they can use it anywhere, is actually in the tell. So if you think of a chapter which is fairly long, within the chapter you can set up another grab, you can tell a bit more, you can tease, and so on. And so you can nest, that is, have one grab, tell, tease within another, and even within another. Obviously it can get quite complicated, and I would on the side of caution here and not try to get too clever, but some sophisticated writers are brilliant at doing this, and also including the other thing I've mentioned here, which is interleaving. Now, interleaving is often used in conjunction with timelines in fiction, where there are several timelines in the story that run side by side, and the reader moves from one timeline to another. Again, it's a sophisticated technique, brilliant when done well, really frustrating when done badly. But interleaving does actually apply to non-fiction as well, because knowledge isn't really linear, whereas a book is, and so sometimes you need to introduce things maybe in a very simple way and then deal with them in more detail later. And interleaving using the grab, tell, tease works very well. Now, I don't want to get too abstract about this, but you know, when you're doing this, it's something as simple as we'll find out more about this in chapter 5 is part of the mechanism that you might be using in fiction. Of course, it needs to be a bit more subtle than that. But nevertheless, I'm sure you've seen techniques used in fiction. So that's the tell when you include the grab, tell, tease within it. And what next then? Well, I'm going to round off with this. There are actually dozens of things I could put in here, and I thought there's no point, it just get swamped. But there is a fundamental thing which is not, I think, widely known, but is profoundly true, and that is that every statement is the answer to a question. And I would ask you to look at statements as written down in fiction or non-fiction, in fact, worth looking at both, and then ask yourself the question, what is the question that this statement answers? And sometimes it's a great diagnostic tool. If something doesn't read right, it could be that the statement is answering the wrong question. And the key thing here is what questions are forming in the reader's mind as you write. And if you're setting it up, particularly with a grab, then you need to be very, very careful that you are actually answering the right question with your statements and not the wrong one. So playing around with this can be incredibly illuminating and helpful, and is a bit of a diagnostic anywhere in the writing where you're trying to use these techniques and it doesn't seem to be flowing quite right. So that just about rounds off where we are in this sequence, and I hope you found that useful. That was part 2 of grab, tell, tease, and the tease part will be coming in the next part 3, that is, of this 3-part coverage of grab, tell, tease. If you want to make sure you don't miss it, you could press on the bell button. Please subscribe. I hope to have you back again soon. Bye for now.